Hello, I'm Gemma and this is Non-Fic Books, and today I have a review video for The Pleasure of Reading, edited by Antonia Fraser. This book was published in 1992 by Bloomsbury as part of the bicentenary celebrations for W.H. Smith's, and it's 251 pages long. The basic premise is that there are 40 authors who have written short essays on their favourite books, how they got into reading as a child, and how the reading has developed throughout their lifetime. And then, if you can see by the cover, there is 40 different illustrators, each to tie in, and some of them are absolutely beautiful, like that, and some of them are a little bit too 80s and 90s for my taste. I can't say I really love them all that much, but I don't really like illustrations in books apart from photographs, so that could just be my bias. I think this book is definitely more suited to a slightly older audience. A lot of the authors, it was obviously published in 92 and they were big authors at that moment in time. A lot of the authors were born in the 30s to 50s, some a bit later, but they are just that bit older, and while a number of them are well known to us now, people like Germaine Greer, Jeanette Winterson, Sue Townsend, Melvin Bragg. There are a lot of authors that I certainly had never heard of in there, and I think there'll be a number of other people who would also not have heard of them. Which is okay, you don't need to have heard of all of the authors to enjoy this book, but I think there's just an extra level of enjoyment if people do know these authors and their works. And it's really interesting because you could read it individually and space out time in between each of the essays, but I think this is a book that becomes even more fascinating if you read it in quite large chunks and you read a number of essays together, because the comparison between all of these people who are part of the literary world, how their attitudes differ towards books and their experiences with books growing up is just fascinating. There's some who have been readers since the second they could sort of make out words on the back of a cereal packet, or there are some who really didn't become readers properly until they were in their 20s or even later. And I think it's really heartwarming to see people having developed a love of books and literature throughout a large time period, and that if you don't love books when you're 7 or 8, it doesn't mean you can never enter that world and learn to enjoy this wonderful, rich offering that's there. And a lot of them, and again, this sort of links to the time period where a lot of them grew up, link first books with first cigarettes. The same heady rush, not an approved view, not saying you go out and smoke, but it's that same addictive, obsessional quality. And that seems to be the one thing that ties in with almost all of the authors. There's two main camps. The first one I much more relate to, and that's people who fell in love with reading through reading things like the Richmal Crompton Just William books, or Enid Blyton books, or even the Beano and the Dandy. And they believe that it's just good to be reading. And if you're reading anything, it's entering that wonderful world for you. And you can easily develop onto more rich, diverse writing as you get older and as you your passion increases. And then there's another half of the camp, which I would just call quite snobby, really. If they deign to admit that they read these very typical children's books, it's very dismissively done, and then it's all about the books that they read when they were older, the higher literature that they're very proud to have been reading. And I don't know about you, but it's really off-putting because I certainly wasn't asking for Chekhov for my 13th birthday. It just didn't happen. I think it's not how most people come across books and literature. And there's a wonderful quote that I'd like to read you from Doris Lessing's essay. And it's, "What is wrong with reading Shakespeare as a comic book and then going on to reading or seeing Shakespeare? There is a short step from Mills and Boon to Jane Eyre." And I think that's really important, because I think as long as you're reading, you're losing yourself, you're escaping, you're enjoying the world of literature. And as she said, it's very easy to then grow to read more diverse and more challenging books. And I think it's hugely important to challenge yourself with books, but that doesn't mean you should lose the joy and the magic of books, which you can especially feel as a child. And something that was brought up in a theme of a couple of the essays was that it isn't always a good idea to read these wonderful, great classics when you're so young. That it's fantastic to read a number of them and to widen your reading as much as possible, but you'll only get one first time with every book, and that sometimes it is better to do it when you're older and you have more life experience behind you. The meaning and the empathy and the connection you can get with a book then can, on some levels, be so much deeper. You may certainly enjoy the book when you're younger, but there can be a connection when you're older that there just can't be because there just hasn't been enough years and life experience. And I think that's really interesting, and I think it really, one of the messages from a lot of these authors that I got out of it was just not being guilty. Enjoy reading, love reading, and don't let other people get you down about what you're loving to read. As long as you're enjoying it and as long as you're pushing yourself to embrace new things, then that's fantastic. The one person that I found really interesting was Alan Hollingsworth, who is a novelist, and yet he doesn't particularly like novels. He doesn't often read them, he mainly reads poetry, and if he reads a novel, what he's looking for is beautiful language, really beautiful scenery, but plot is not something he particularly cares about, so he's more than happy if he's loving a book to just stop it halfway because he's got what he wants out of it, which I thought was really unusual. It's certainly not how I read, and I thought that was a really nice viewpoint to get such a different attitude. And it is a really, really interesting book. I really recommend anyone picking it up. It also comes in a really nice paperback format, which I believe has even been put in some hotels rather than the Good News or anything like that. So I'd really recommend picking it up because it's always good, I think, to make yourself mull over and discuss books and reading and not just consume without having thought about them. So I'd highly, highly recommend this book. It's a really nice thing to flip through, and I will certainly be rereading some of these articles over probably the rest of my life. I think it's a really nice book, and I would be really interested to see a modern take on it. I think it could be a really fascinating thing to have modern authors doing this. So if there is anything like that, let me know down below because I'd love to read something else like this. And if you have any questions and comments, do leave them down below, and I'll hopefully see you in a video soon. Bye!